I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. Last week we took a look at the best enemies in Dark Souls. Today we're flipping that on its head and looking at the worst enemies in Dark Souls. The creatures that, when I see them in the world, I immediately groan because I'd rather just skip past them or be anywhere else. With such a vast array of enemies to fight, there are bound to be some duds throughout, so let's take a look. Like my last video, the rules are the same. If it doesn't have a boss health bar, it's viable to appear on this list. No NPCs like Havel, Oscar, or Ricard, I'd rather rank those fights as their own list one day. And no bosses turned enemies later in the game, such as the Taurus demons or Capra demons in the Demon Ruins. That's just too easy. So without further ado, my top 10 worst enemies in the original Dark Souls, ranked. Let me know your least favourite enemies down below. Taking the number 10 spot, we have the Channelers of the Duke's Archives. And let me be clear, that specification is purposeful. I think the Channelers found in the Depths and the Undead Parish are actually well placed and pretty fun obstacles. See, these guys are Seath's support units, able to buff the enemies around them to do insane amounts of damage. We all got killed by that horde of charged up hollows in the parish on our first playthrough, it's okay to admit it. And the Depths Channeler potentially being able to snipe you during the Gaping Dragon boss fight if you don't find them in the level first is a nice mechanic. It rewards exploration. Where these enemies lose me though is their Duke's Archives appearance. They still act as support units, buffing the crystal hollows found throughout the building, but with the sheer amount of enemies that pour out of that first room with the first channeler, it can feel far too overwhelming for players right off the bat. You have to take your time or be confident in your ability to run past hordes of enemies, and it's always frustrating when you clear most of the room out, but a stray arrow or ambush ends your run, forcing you to do it all again. But more so than that, it's the channelers that you face after escaping the prison that drove me up the wall. They teleport away from you at a moment's notice, meaning even with high damage, you may fail to kill them with your first hit, and then they're gone. Once teleported, they then begin the fun of firing at you with magic attacks. The Duke's Archives are a series of straight hallways with barely any space to hide, as by ducking away from one magic attack, you'll probably find yourself in the path of an entirely different enemy, and it leads to a really frustrating experience that I just don't enjoy regardless of my playthrough. Then there's my true hatred for these enemies, the Channeler's Trident. In order to 100% this game, you need to complete an achievement called Rare Weapons, and one of those weapons is their Trident. The issue is it has a 1% drop rate, and the only respawning channelers are those 3 found in the archives. And there's no comfortable route from either bonfire in the area to actually kill them with any sort of consistency or speed. I spent 2 days farming for this weapon, using all the item discovery boosts I could, all the extra humanity, and by the end of it I was done. Sure, other enemies also have rare drops, but at least they have fun farming routes. Still, the Channeler only ranks 10th on this list because those first 2 appearances really saved it from being bottom of the barrel. Taking the number 9 spot, we have the titular Drakes from the Valley of the Drakes. These dark blue creatures are, for me, some of the most janky to fight enemies in the game. Not because of their movesets, which I actually feel are quite fleshed out. After all, they have multiple different electricity attacks that will catch players off guard, who likely would be expecting fire-based damage to come from the baby dragons. They have a melee bite attack, which can deal heavy damage, and they have the mobility to catch up with you if you attempt to run. No, the issue with the Drakes is that their moveset doesn't function with the area in the world they're found in. See, in one of my last playthroughs, I needed to farm the Drakes for their dragon scales so that I could upgrade my dragon greatsword. Sounds simple enough, just kill the Drakes, get those scales, head down to Ash Lake, bish bash bosh, right? Wrong. Because as we all know, in order to collect materials from an enemy, you need to go up to its corpse and click on the item. That doesn't exactly work when there is no corpse to click on, because one of the main attacks of the drakes is a jump backwards followed by an electric projectile before they land on the ground, and the problem is that most of the drakes are found on a very thin bridge connecting New Londo to the valley, so more often than not, the drakes will accidentally end up suiciding into the pit while using the aforementioned move. Also, with how many of the drakes are just plopped down near each other on that bridge, it bothers me because it doesn't feel like there was any thought put into their placement. It's not smart or intuitive, it just feels like enemies got copy-pasted like that Taurus demon lake in the demon ruins. They deserved better, and honestly I wish the Valley of Drakes was a more fleshed out area to compensate. Wouldn't it have been cool exploring a valley filled with different colored drakes using different breath weapons? I could even gaslight myself into thinking it was Spyro the Dragon 4. Taking the number 8 spot, we have a rare enemy type that doesn't actually respawn, but on a first playthrough, will definitely harass you and give you trouble. The Blow Dart Snipers from Blighttown. These hollows can be found strategically placed along the wooden ramparts of Blighttown, often so they can strike at you as you're attempting to descend with their toxic darts. They're the ultimate support enemy, as you will never engage with them in proper battle, instead having to be mindful of their positions as you deal with everything else. Attack dogs, barbarians, ghouls, they'll all be striking you with everything they have. Meanwhile, you've been toxiced by these snipers and you likely don't have the purple moss clump variant that heals toxic. It's an absolutely brutal gauntlet for new players who'll have no idea how to reach the snipers and their positions quickly. The plus is that once you've found the sniper, they can't do anything to hurt you from melee range, and once slain, they don't respawn, making your next journey through the area a much easier ride. I'd honestly say it's more important to kill these bozos first before focusing on figuring out the descent, but of course they reappear on the ascent via the water wheel as well, acting as guardians for the Firekeeper soul in one of the drainage ducts. Here, you're basically guaranteed to get toxic, so you may as well go full suicide mode and run up to them and kill them, heal as quickly as you can, grab that Firekeeper soul, and homeward bone back to the bonfire before your next ascent. They're not an obnoxiously evil enemy type, they're just very inconvenient, and I feel like Blighttown would be just as hard without them there. But they're not my least favorite enemy from this area. That'd be my number 7 pick, the Flaming Attack Dogs. I thought long and hard about how I'd handle Dark Souls dogs because it'd be so easy to chuck every single dog into one entry and call it a day. But no, as much as I meme on the dogs in the Souls series, I can't deny that some of them aren't as bad as others. But if there's one type that's always caught me off guard, it would be Blighttown's Flaming Attack Dogs because of their surprisingly fast speed and their damage that's bolstered through fire. It's an extra layer of pain that you just won't be prepared for so early in the game, and giving these pups like to hang out right next to the upper Blighttown bonfire, you'll be facing them every single time you die and respawn. Combine them with the previous entry's dart blowers and it's a miserable time. They're more frustrating than your regular dogs because on top of their stronger DPS, they're also smaller in size, meaning a smaller hitbox. So depending on your build, you may have a weapon whose moveset just isn't designed for hitting such small critters. They appear again on the ascent near the Firekeeper soul, similar to our last entry, sitting down in the sewer portion where the item actually is. And I'll freely admit, these doggos tend to kill me once or twice every single playthrough. When they attack as a pack, it can be very overwhelming because of the high damage and the high amount of stamina it takes to block one of their bites. It's very easy to find yourself staggered and killed in a moment's notice, so you have to take the dogs with a lot of caution. Plunging attacking one of them is practically a requirement when you head down to face them, and knowing their positions is another. First-time players will die to these doggos, more so than a regular normal pup, and that is just a fact of life. And if they break out the fire breath, just take the L. The designs are cool though, and luckily they aren't very plentiful outside of those specific locations, which is what keeps them lower on my list today. Avoiding my top 5, we have our number 6 entry, the Slimes, found in the depths. These creatures constantly show up in some form in FromSoft's library, but I find this outing to be especially irritating, if you're planning on running a magic build early on even more so. See, slimes in the depths are the only early game enemies until you reach the leeches in Lower Blighttown that drop green titanite shards, which are needed for specific upgrade trees, including magic. So I've spent a good amount of time running back and forth through the depths, farming these fuckers in that one hallway for a healthy amount of time. The issue is that they're incredibly tanky. The first one that jump scares you when you pick up an item is fine, it's an introduction, it's meant to scare the player, but once you're surrounded in a hallway of them and your attacks barely scratch, it just gets so much worse. Yes, they're weak to fire, but unless you've got a fire-based weapon or you're a pyromancer, you won't want to use your charcoal pine resin on them because for a couple of enemies, it's not worth using an item that you don't have a lot of in the early game. They're honestly just incredibly inconvenient to fight, and unlike other tanky creatures, they don't have an exciting or interesting moveset to help counteract the boredom of whittling them down. They're purely there to waste your time, and that's okay. I understand their existence, it's a fantasy RPG, slimes are a requirement, but don't expect me to walk around stanning them, especially if they do manage to get you in a grab attack. That animation takes so long to get them off, it's like watching paint dry. Luckily, we only ever see them in the depths, and they don't hit you with any annoying status effects either. I just never want to fight one again, lest I be reminded of my awful days farming them. That's actually a good through line though. I really don't like enemies that I was forced to farm for builds and achievements that didn't engage back with me. It's the same issue I had with the Drakes, but at least they had a moveset. Hey viewers, a brief moment of your time. It's February, I'm officially moved to my new home, but the journey for 20,000 subscribers before summer of 2024 doesn't stop here. Take a look at how many of you aren't subscribed, kinda crazy, right? So be sure, if you enjoy the rest of this video, to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future rankings and videos. Back to the list. Starting off our top 5, we have the last of the non-respawning mini-bosses, the Armored Tusks. Now just to clarify, this is purely from a gameplay perspective, because I actually think the Armored Tusks have a really cool design. This metallic armored boar with glowing red eyes and a hidden weak spot right at the tail hole. It's extra, it's heavy metal, and you're lying if on your first ever visit to the Undead Parish, you weren't intimidated by seeing a gigantic boar on the path you need to take. Unfortunately, I've never really found him fun to fight. The first setup is well designed, I can admit that. If you run to the side and up the stairs, you're safe from the boar's charge, and can work on defeating the enemies on the rooftops before focusing on the boss itself. And that's what I used to do in my early runs. Nowadays though, as you can see from my footage, I prefer to go toe-to-toe with the boar and lead it down towards the entry stairs, bugging out its AI so that it turns around to head back so I can slam my sword right up its ass. It's not pretty, but it works. There's also the alluring skull method, where you can chuck an alluring skull into the fire on the street, and the boar will walk into it, killing itself. My main issue with this mini-boss has always been that I just find the actual melee moveset incredibly boring and unintuitive, enhanced by the pair you face at the Duke's Archives, who are boasting a flawless coat of metal with no weak points left to strike, and a buffed up amount of damage they can deal. I just find fighting these two guys in such a closed-off hallway to be so boring and bland, especially when with the one in the parish there are so many different ways to go about it. Sure, they can kill me, they're strong, but unless you've got fire or lightning to hit them at their weakness, there's not much you can do except bonk your weapons against the metal and hope you win. It's like the slimes from the last entry, except these fuckers are stronger. If it were just the parish variant, this mini-boss might have actually made it onto my best list, but the Duke's Archives variants are just so lazily added. They aren't serving, they're not giving what they're meant to be giving, and I find them so forgettable as a result. Hot take alert, call it Stockholm Syndrome, but at number 4 we have the Bone Wheel Skeletons, found in the depths of the catacombs and the painted world of Ariamis. This would normally be most people's number 1, it's easily the most hated enemy in the game online, and I totally understand why. Compared to the nerfed versions in the future games, the Dark Souls 1 Bone Wheels were killing machines. Get caught off guard and you'd be staggered and slaughtered in mere moments. And the way they're always hidden just out of sight in the areas they're encountered means you're never quite sure if one's about to ram into you from behind. Their DPS is insane, and they've likely killed me more times than the rest of the enemies on this list, and yet I still have a soft spot for them. I can recognize how awful they can be, while also recognizing that I actually like that element of challenge they throw at you. Except the ones in the super thin hallways in the painted world, they can go fuck themselves. But the ones in the lever room, illuminated barely in the darkness, or the ones guarding Pinwheel at the bottom of the catacombs, I actually think are cool. Their designs are incredibly sick, going harder than most enemies in this game, and yet get a swarm of them attacking you and you're gonna have a bad time. You have to dodge out of the way, shielding will lead to devastating stamina damage that will likely result in taking more hits. I do think, though, the Catacombs Bone Wheels are just unfair for first-time players. The Catacombs is such a difficult area to navigate, with the necromancers and the hordes of skeletons, plus that one Black Knight, so reaching the bottom and then getting killed right before the boss fog because of some stray Bone Wheels can feel devastating. At least with the Painted World, you're 2 seconds away from the room you find them in on a respawn. Here, you have to go through either every tunnel again, or use various shortcut skips that new players won't realize they can do. It's brutal, and a difficulty spike that is almost laughable, given straight after, you face the easiest boss in the game. I may not hate them myself, but I feel I have to put them here nevertheless. Taking the numero 3 spot, we have the case for most useless enemy inclusion in the entire game, to the point where I don't even consider this pick true enemies, more obstacles to navigate. And yet they have a health bar and they can be killed. It's the Bounding Demons, found in the lava-filled wastes of Lost Izalith. The back halves of undead dragons, the literal butts of every joke that comes their way, courtesy of Lost Izalith's status as one of the most rushed areas in the series, these demons populate the entire outer half of Izalith, and you have to run past them to make it to the main temple, using tree roots and ruined buildings to get there. Most of them won't ever spot you, their aggro range is surprisingly small, acting more as set pieces than anything else. But should you get curious, they're also not worth killing. Sure, they don't respawn, but I wouldn't call them mini-bosses or anything. They're just big, hit hard, and the cherry on top, they give you barely enough souls for a bus ticket home when you kill them. It doesn't help that there's barely anything aside from a few consumables in the Izalith lava pool to collect, so you're not really even intended to fight them. They fundamentally fail at being enemies, and they fundamentally fail at rewarding the player for going out of the way to kill them. If anything, slaughtering them all just means you have to look at those bright lava textures with nothing to hide them, a fate worse than death if you're playing the original version of the game. It sucks for the developers, as we can all tell these enemies were copy-pasted into Izalith as a last-minute decision, and their function is to funnel the player to the temple with as little danger as possible, but it comes at their detriment, and it wouldn't feel correct creating a top 3 worst enemies in Dark Souls without including the enemies that many will think of when they think the most wasted potential. Taking today's silver medal, we have the Burrowing Rockworms found in the Demon Ruins. I've gone on record multiple times stating that I just hate these enemies. Sure, as a magic build or a pyromancer build, you can take them out from afar without much risk, but as someone who tends to go pure melee on most of my runs, these rockworms are miserable to fight. The first you'll find is the one by the Demon Ruins mid-level bonfire, and as you can see from my footage, I had a rough time killing it. This is because I was running a big heavy strength build, so my slow attacks meant the enemy was too fast for me to hit it before getting swiped away. However, it's the corridor leading to the Ember to the left of the Fog Gate where I realized just how much I hate these enemies. You'll notice I'm using someone else's footage because in my playthrough, I just didn't want to go down that hallway. You get ambushed by these creatures behind and in front, stopping you from doing anything except swinging your weapon and praying you kill something. You can run past them with some well-timed dodge rolls, but then you have to get back through them assuming you don't have a homeward bone. I don't know, I just never found this enemy's moveset to be particularly fun. Their reach is just too large, and I had to cheese them with my Dragon Greatsword's special attack to actually kill them, which doesn't feel really good. Okay, that's a lie, it feels good in the sense of, ha, fuck you, you're dead now, but it doesn't feel satisfying from a gameplay perspective. I really want to enjoy every enemy in these games in a way where I'm challenged while still feeling like it's a fair fight. With the burrowing rockworms, I've never felt like I'm on equal or fair footing with them. It doesn't help that they're in one of my least favorite areas in the series to play through as well. They're not my #1 most hated enemy though, because at least I can skip them without fighting any if I really want to. Unlike today's gold medalist, whom we are required to fight, it's time to crown our winner. The worst enemies in Dark Souls are the engorged zombies found in the painted world of Ariamis. That's right, it's not an enemy with an intensely designed moveset, or even an enemy that many find difficult. Instead, my least favorite is a cancerous growth of a basic enemy that happens to have one of the most annoying gimmicks. The regular engorged zombies are mostly fine to fight, using a pyromancy moveset as they shoot fireballs at the player. The torch-wielding hollows are a little more dangerous, as underestimating any enemy that wields a torch in this game is a mistake that will lead to death, with a surprisingly high amount of damage due to the flames. I don't mind those though. What I do mind is the toxic poison. Both of these enemies have the ability to spew toxic gas, which is fine, dodge away, all good, but when you kill them, if you're not using fire weapons, they explode in a toxic AoE that will almost always leave you with the toxic status effect. Now, if you have blooming purple moss clumps, this is fine, you can heal it, but if you don't, there's no way to go and get some because you're trapped in the painted world until you reach the end of the area. So sometimes you'll get toxicked and you'll have to walk back down to the bonfire, reset the area state, and do it all again to heal the effect. And these guys are everywhere. You have to fight them with some element of range so you're not poisoned, which is a pain if you're running a pure melee build like I was in this playthrough. It's better to just run past these enemies than actively engage with them, but they're the main enemy type for the first half of the painted world, which makes it near impossible to avoid their toxic. If I could leave, buy some moss and come back, sure, but as said, it's impossible to do that. So a new player could find themselves trapped in Ariamis and dealing with one of the most annoying status effects in the game as they desperately try to progress to find a shortcut. It doesn't promote a playstyle I enjoy and actively feels like a fuck you to the player, something that I feel with many of the Ariamis enemy types. The Phalanx is lucky I can run past it because those hoplites would be on the list too if they were a little more annoying to get past. There are no other enemies in this game that give me a visceral sense of oh god, oh no, than these guys. And purely for that reaction, they earn their #1 spot with ease. Britney Spears toxic? They are not. And that's my list. Which of these enemies was your least favorite? Did I miss any potential picks? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button to stay up to date on all of my future videos. My socials are on screen now, feel free to follow where you feel comfortable. I recommend my Twitter, my Blue Sky, or my Discord. We've recently opened up YouTube channel memberships for the channel, $4.99 a month, and you get featured at the end of the video in the descriptions, and you get 24-hour access to my Tuesday videos. How exciting. A massive shout out to you guys and my patrons over on Patreon as well. Thank you so much for your support. I'll see you guys next time for another video. Adios.